Welcome to Lesson 6. Today, we're going to talk about Chinese consumers. There's a great McKinsey article on the Chinese consumer that I shared in the weekly email. But in this lesson, we will dig deeper into the cultural context of these macro trends, so you can develop a more intuitive understanding of the mindset of Chinese consumers. Chinese consumers today are earning more, have access to credit, which no one had just a generation ago, and they are spending more money on a wider variety of products and services. For example, I taught cross-cultural management through Hong Kong University to Chinese executives, and a large percentage of them paid out of their own pocket. These executives paid their own way to take 2 full days of classes on Saturday and Sunday, once per month for 15 months, in order to elevate their careers. Traditionally in China, you advance your career through guanxi connections, where gift giving, including red packets of money, is quite normal and expected. But today, more and more of that money is being diverted to services as opposed to connections. Chinese consumers are spending much more on luxury today than Americans or any other country for that matter. Just look at the latest statistics from the Swiss watch industry and the overwhelming growth coming from China. If you are selling products and services to Chinese consumers, it is essential to eliminate as many misperceptions as possible about how they make their buying decisions and what makes Chinese consumers tick. So, I'm not going to summarize what's in the McKinsey report because you could read it for yourself. What I am going to do is try to help you make better decisions based on that report by providing additional context into the Chinese mindset. First, relative to Western values, don't assume that Chinese consumers are guided by the same principles. It's not that Chinese don't have principles. In fact, Chinese probably have less flexibility when it comes to their principles than most foreigners in China. For example, as far as luxury items, Chinese may insist on a known brand, whereas more Americans would value the utility or practicality of a product and focus more on the overall value. In this case, Chinese probably care more about their face and the perception of being associated with a luxury brand than the overall value. Now, when it comes to something like moral principles, for example, buying counterfeit products or environmental causes outside of China, Chinese probably lean more in the opposite direction. Except for nationalism, Chinese people generally don't care much about causes that don't have an immediate impact on themselves or their families. Sometimes when countries go against China, there can be a severe backlash by the entire country. You can think about the recent backlash against Korean tourism, low-T superstores, and other Korean brands when South Korea decided to deploy the American THAAD system. It might be also a misperception that average income has significance. Most luxury items in China cost more, around 40% more due to import duties and other value-added taxes, but this has not stopped imports from selling quite well to the affluent market and growing middle class. Culturally, Chinese often have access to discretionary funds that most average Americans would not. These funds come in the forms of houses and land that every registered citizen is allocated to family savings, which is generally funneled to an only child due to China's one-child policy that only recently became a two-child policy. On the flip side, national brands are gaining recognition in many sectors across a wide variety of segments and income classes in China. So the perception that being in a foreign brand would necessarily command a premium is more and more misleading. So the greatest challenge of marketing to Chinese consumers is understanding that macro trends in China generally evolve very quickly, and trying to position your product or service to connect with them can be a daunting challenge. Positioning and timing is quite difficult in and of itself, but it is even more complicated if you don't understand the Chinese mindset or the macro business environment in China. So the first challenge is that comparatively, Chinese consumers are more fickle. In fact, you should probably assume that there is no brand loyalty, which in the worst case helps to prevent complacency, but in the best case, it may spur innovation. There is also a herd mentality with Chinese consumers. If you are in the B2C space, finding the right KOL will likely make or break your entry into the Chinese market. There's no Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram in China. So you will need to leverage an entirely new set of social media channels to reach Chinese consumers. And this is where often finding the right local partner can make or break your success. And in many respects, Chinese social media is ahead of their US counterparts, especially with payments. So you need to find the right partner or partners to unlock its full marketing potential. The most common mistakes when selling to Chinese consumers relates to not understanding Chinese cultural values and evolving Chinese tastes, and also making strategic decisions based on preconceived notions. So the answer is yes, you need to localize the marketing message, if not the entire value proposition of your product or service. And not doing so would be a mistake. But the most common mistakes may not be mistakes in the classical sense, but they are missed opportunities when decision makers fail to quantify the significance of a macro trend in China. And when they fail to tailor their message to speak directly to Chinese consumers, but instead assume that they are part of a larger global audience. So if you can avoid these common mistakes, then we should examine some of the macro trends. Chinese are increasingly more health conscious, so there is almost as many fitness clubs as Starbucks in first-tier Chinese cities. Chinese are more safety conscious, especially about food, and even more so about food for their children. Chinese parents want their children to study abroad, so this in and of itself creates a multi-billion-dollar industry. Affluent Chinese want to immigrate abroad. Chinese are the world's largest group of vacationers, and they are increasingly seeking personal identities through hobbies, arts, and recreation. Now, for my killer tips, I'm going to give you some guidelines for developing your marketing strategies. Given the macro business environment in China, unless you have a lifestyle business, success is often about speed, scale, and hype. If you are representing or speaking on behalf of your product or service, always try to incorporate some wit or humor, and don't be too serious. Craft a compelling story. One of the advantages that foreign brands have is often their originating story from when the company was founded hundreds of years ago. And this can be an advantage in branding against most Chinese brands that have no more than 10 or 20 years old. It is also important to understand that the perception of immediate benefits is important in your marketing. Even if your product or service provides some long-term outcome or benefit, it is important to position them so they create the perception of short-term or immediate results. In this regard, Chinese consumers can be assumed to have less patience. One final thing to remember is that in China, there's always an undercurrent of nationalism. You don't necessarily need to incorporate a nationalistic message, but you do need to make sure you don't unintentionally disrespect China or the Chinese people. Congratulations, you have finished the formal portion of Lesson 6. I hope you are finding these lessons helpful, and it's also been a real learning experience for me, and I promise you the quality and the presentation of these lessons will continue to improve. And as always, please let me know your experiences, leave your comments, and your feedback. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the Lesson 6 video. So today we're gonna try something different. It's Sunday here in Irvine, California, and this is my home office. So this is where I work when I don't go into the office. Today, instead of just talking about Chinese consumers, I want to talk something about influencing the perception of others. Because in a cross-cultural context or a cross-cultural situation, a lot of people talk about language being the gateway into a foreign culture, and while that's true, when we talk about navigating a foreign culture in a business context, working with consumers, working with partners, working with employees, working with various stakeholders in a foreign country, and here, especially true when Americans go over to China, one of the biggest influencers of outcomes, especially long-term outcomes, is perceptions. And perceptions are basically how you are perceived by other people. And well, first of all, you have to care. A lot of people just simply don't care how they are actually perceived, or they're just myopic and they're completely oblivious to how they're perceived. So I didn't come up with the phrase, but there's a phrase called unknown unknowns. And I think Donald Rumsfeld actually first came up with it when he was trying to describe the lack of progress as far as what's going on in Iraq. I don't remember the exact details, but a lot of other people have used the term unknown unknowns when foreigners go to China. And basically it means that you don't know what you don't know. And this is the hardest part about talking about this concept, because how do you talk about something you don't know, and how do you even realize that what you don't know is even having an impact on your success. So what we do at EME is we kind of, first of all, develop this framework. And the framework is kind of like, there are known knowns, so there are things that you know, and there are known unknowns. So for example, you may not really fully understand Chinese culture, you may not speak the Chinese language. You've heard the term guanxi, but you really don't understand its implications and its nuances. You've heard about Chinese giving and receiving face, Chinese reciprocity, but you haven't really utilized these concepts in your personal life or even in your business life, so you don't really know how they're applied. So these are kind of your known unknowns. You kind of have a sense that you're not really familiar with these things, but these are things that people can teach you. So you can, any Chinese person can start to familiarize you with the concepts that you don't know. The question is, when they're explaining it to you, how are you interpreting it? Are you able to empathize with people you're communicating with, and especially with people who are trying to help you, what they're trying to explain? Now, a lot of intercultural trainers do that. They kind of try to teach you the things that you don't know when you go to, in this case, China. We want to dig a little deeper, and we want to talk about unknown unknowns, and these are things you don't know. And these are the things that I think have the most significant impact on long-term outcomes, because it affects how you are perceived. It may be difficult to imagine when you flip it around, but you can always look at it from the context of when you perceive other people. When other people are kind of talking about certain things and you're thinking, wow, this, I really want to tell this person what I really think, but I think I'm just going to reserve that, but I don't want to work with this person. And this is what unknown unknowns cause a lot of people in a cross-cultural situation, and especially as it deals with China. So there's two sides to this unknown unknowns. One is you don't know how you are perceived. And there's another thing that I've kind of come up with, and it's the extension of known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and there's another thing called false known knowns. So this is really when you are myopic. So these are really things that you think you know because you think they're a global standard, or you think that there are universal values that everybody goes by and they always seem to work in your home country. And then when you go over to China, you should assume that everybody should share these universal values. And these are false known knowns. One of the things that has been demonstrated to me over and over again when I talk with Chinese people, and of course I'm fluent in Chinese, so I talk to Chinese people in Chinese, and they often don't know that I'm a foreigner because I speak fluent Chinese. But because my thinking a lot of times is more Americanized, I can kind of sense what the difference is between what I believe and what they believe. And a lot of times it comes down to things that I think are common sense, they think are contradictory. And things that the Chinese think are common sense, I think that's not common sense at all. And sometimes it's not just about facts or procedures, it's really about emotions on, for example, why would you bring certain things up in a certain situation? Even as simple as, why would I try to explain this if you already don't agree with it? In a Western culture, it's common sense to try to explain, to analyze, and to put the facts on the table and try to come up with a negotiation where everybody can agree. But a lot of times in the Chinese culture, where the thinking is more circular, some things, when you try to explain, it actually makes things worse. And so maybe this is not making a lot of sense now, but I'm putting together some articles, and a lot of this will be discussed in more detail in the next free lessons, which is going to be Cross-Cultural Performance 101. And I also included a little bit in this week's email with a diagram that really kind of captures the progression from things you know, all the way through things you don't know, to things you think you know that are actually false, and the implications they can have in a cross-cultural situation, and things that you can actually do to overcome them, because unknown unknowns is not something that you can actually learn. Awareness and empathy are things you have to develop. Okay, so anyway, I'm still kind of trying to figure out how I want to do these courses. CB101, China Business 101, this is kind of like just the first run through. So I don't know how I'm going to improve the editing of these videos right now. I'm just basically doing a PowerPoint with the script, and then just recording kind of random thoughts about cross-cultural performance and attaching it to the end of these videos, and trying to make these lessons roughly 20 minutes long. Okay, so hope you guys are enjoying these videos. Again, leave me your feedback, your comments, and join CLD Nation. It's the Facebook group. A lot of content, all of these lessons, and a lot of material will be posted in the Facebook group. And hopefully you guys will start sharing your CLDs, and we can start having discussions about why you had these unexpected disappointments, and potentially how you can develop soft skills in order to avoid them in the future. Okay, thanks. This is lesson 6.